Hey everyone, this is Eve Picker. And if you listen to this podcast series, you're going to learn how to make some change. Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Scott Choppin. Scott is the founder of the Urban-Pacific family of companies, and he likes to describe himself as a contrarian developer. What's that, you ask? Urban-Pacific's workforce housing projects use private equity while serving middle-income, stable, multi-generational families. Their townhouses are generally 5-bedroom, an anathema in this millennial studio apartment era. And that's why they are contrarian. Still, Scott's projects have historically generated 25% plus investor internal rate of return. Scott points out that multi-generational living is growing in the US. A report from the Pew Research Center shows that 20% of adults, or 64 million people, are living with 2 or more adult generations in a single household. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Scott on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Scott, thanks so much for joining me on this podcast. And I've been really fascinated to see your e-newsletters arrive in my inbox talking about contrarian development and other things like that. So I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're working on today.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you, Eve. Happy to be with you here. So let me do this. Let me just give the briefest of backgrounds, and this will build background for yourself and your audience about why we are then doing what we're doing in our development operations today. So Scott Choppin, founder and CEO of the Urban-Pacific group of companies. Basically, background, probably 30 plus years in various forms of the real estate development business, all the way from, working in the field as a construction worker, all the way up through to today as, running a development company as the CEO. But 2 key points of my career really guide what we do today. And my first job out of college, I worked for a guy named Mike Costa at a division of a company that was called at the time Kaufman and Broad, now known as KB Home. But our division that Mike ran and where I worked was called Kaufman and Broad Multi-Housing Group. And that was a developer and syndicator of affordable housing communities really throughout the nation. It was a corporate, in-house offer, meaning it was KB investing in affordable housing projects. And then it grew into, full syndication shop. My role there was as a project manager on the development side. So I joined Mike's team as really super green assistant project manager and left there as their most seasoned senior project manager with full, P&L responsibility for multiple projects at any given time, but all development, all new construction, and all affordable housing. And I left there and I went to work for a couple of different companies, but the most noteworthy one is a group called Sares-Regis Group in Orange County here in Southern California where we live. And I worked there for a period of time, and that gave me exposure on the market rate side. So KB was affordable, purely new construction. Sares-Regis was new construction, but market rate. And then I left Sares-Regis Group to found what is now the Urban-Pacific group of companies. So we're on our 19th year of operations now. And we have always focused on infill development. That's our specialty. That's something that we are passionate about. And we have done various product types. As you would imagine, we've done affordable housing. We've done market rate. We've done both for sale and rental projects. But over the last few years, let's say since about 2012, we've been entirely focused on rental housing only. And that's both market rate and affordable, as I said before. But then in 2016, we started to note that the in particular marketplaces where we're in action on projects, particularly Southern California, it appeared that there was starting to be a pretty big wave of a certain type of project. And that was what we describe internally as a podium project, but specifically built and designed to, serve the millennial market, meaning a lot of studio and one bedroom units. And so in 2016, we made the conscious decision to exit all the projects that we had that were that type of projects. And of course, they were the right projects at that time, meaning demographically, the millennial generation is the largest single cohort demographically that we've ever had in the United States.
So just to explain to our listeners who may not
Sure.
be real estate developers, a podium project is one that has a first floor that's retail or other uses like that, acting as a podium for upper floor residential, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I would only add to that description that it's the way I describe it, Eve, is that it's the parking underneath in a concrete parking structure, many times faced with retail on the street, as you described, mixed use, and then 3, 4, 5 or more stories of stick-built, wood-framed, apartment or condo construction sitting on top of the parking deck. In other words, you've got the podium as the parking garage, and then the units above that.
I think for those of us in the industry, we know what it looks like, but I think for people who are not, they're going to start realizing how many of those projects.
Yeah, they'll start to show up for them. Yeah, and I thank you for asking. It's I use it commonly, but in the industry, it's even sometimes I get people who are investors that, may not use that terminology. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's okay.
So just to complete, so back to the second question, which is what are we doing now? And I think relevant to, what your podcast subject is, focus on impact investing. In 2016, we were very aware of how much new product was coming into the marketplace in this specific demographic. In other words, a lot of studio and one bedroom units in these downtown infill locations. And again, a great business plan. But we have always been a company that looked for specialized niche products or contrarian investment and development type of opportunities. And so in 2016, we basically sold everything off that was, a podium or, studio and one bedroom type designs. And we started to look for very consciously a new type of product that we could develop that would be different, that would be something that wasn't mainstream in the marketplace. And what we basically settled on, or not even settled on, what we started to appear for us was a middle market workforce housing product. So as I spoke before, I was in affordable housing and then I went into market rate housing. You can think of those as two ends of a spectrum. So you've got a true affordable housing on one side, 60% and below on median incomes, government subsidized using tax credit financing. On the other side of the spectrum is pure market rate, your standard LP, market rate equity, just pretty mainstream debt products on construction and perm loans. But we saw a gap in the middle, and we can talk, more about the middle. But the middle for us is really from an income and a rental standpoint. We want to serve middle income families, right, with a rental product that's purposely designed and built to serve, them as a family, and obviously relative to the markets that we're in, particularly Southern California. And so we created a new product we call UTH, which stands for Urban Townhouse. We're exclusively focused on that particular product, which is a, middle income, privately financed workforce housing product type or, rental housing offer. So let me stop there and then see what questions that generates.
Be sure to go to evepicker.com and sign up for my free educational newsletter about impact real estate investing. You'll be among the first to hear about new projects you can invest in. That's evepicker.com. Thanks so much. The big question is how does that serve the middle market, that particular housing type?
So the middle market really, I think, have been in three ways. So the first way is really the most important, which is that this is a middle income offer. You call it moderate income housing, call it middle income housing, call it workforce housing. There's different definitions of it. And it all, depends on the person who's listening, the definition. But from our standpoint, the most important thing that we focused on is being in between those two spectrums that we talked about, true affordable housing and market rate, right? So if you look at statistically in the US rental housing markets, what you're starting to see is a movement of the middle class or moderate income families into a higher level of their incomes going towards rental housing.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, the rule's been never spend more than a third of your income on your housing needs, right?
Exactly.
But I've seen statistics lately which are closer to 50%.
Correct. In fact, I was reading an article today that, and I think these are for, true lower income families and individuals. Some people are paying up to 90%. Now that's
shocking.
That's an extreme. And we know that exists because that's what, the true affordable housing market serves. But I have a graph, which, I can share with you as needed, but basically the graph tracks, average incomes across the U.S. and average rents across the U.S. and graphs those two relative to each other. And what you see, what's really apparent when you look at it visually, and we know this, incomes are stagnant or flat, and rents are generally trending up, at a good clip. And so what we're dealing with and what we, are seeing and why we created this product type is an ever widening divergence between the rental rates and median incomes or average incomes, however you want to describe it. And so what's happening, what that does is that moves that middle income family or that moderate income family into a housing distress mode where traditionally, if you went back, 10 years, 20 years, 30 and longer in the history, a average, working class, blue collar, moderate income family could afford to rent. In fact, in many cases, they could afford to buy houses, right? That's starting to lessen at a fairly dramatic pace. And our UTH product is there to address that. Okay. So I'll stop there. And there's a couple other ways that we talk about it, why it's middle, and I'll let you guide me as to how we continue on that.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you're focused on multigenerational, which is pretty unusual too. You mentioned before that many of these podium projects were focused on millennials. And, I'm in Pittsburgh, which sees these trends a little later than on the West Coast, certainly. But I've noticed here the abundance of that type of housing.
An abundance of the studio and one bedroom housing.
Yeah.
So exactly right. So UTH is unique for what we described previously on, serving a modern income family. And we can, talk in more detail later about the how the rents work and what makes them a natural occurring, modern income housing offer. But what the main mechanism of how we produce that benefit to the families, in other words, what is the mechanism of, financially that has a, non-covenanted, no true government rent restriction model, allow it to naturally serve moderate income families. And the way we do this, Eve, is UTH is unique in that all of our units are designed and built to be 5-bedroom townhouse units. All the units have 5 bedrooms, 4 baths. They're in a 3-story townhome model. So garage on the ground floor and a bedroom bathroom on the ground floor. And in fact, that ground floor bedroom bathroom is what provides the multi-generational component. And then, that we have, kitchen, dining, living, and the rest of the bedrooms throughout the 2 upper floors. And what were the multi-generational design component, that we didn't start with that. We actually started originally with a 4-bedroom product type. But as we were, developing the business plan of UTH and coming up with a strategy of how this would work in totality, it started to show up for us that, we're serving middle income families, blue collar working families in Southern California, because that's where we're predominantly developing the UTH model. And from a demographic standpoint, our main renter profile are Hispanic families. in low and lower middle income neighborhoods throughout, let's say, southern LA and northern Orange County, around where we're based. And so what that provided for us was some guidance. We said, okay, if we're going to serve these families, we already knew we were going to do 5 bedrooms. Like, we know we are renting purposely to larger families. What is the makeup of that family? So typically you have 2 to 4 wage earners. That might be mom and dad, aunt or uncle, and then maybe an adult child or 2, that are still living with their family. And then you have some number of small kids that are either kids of the parents or possibly kids of the adult kids. But always we were seeing, grandma and grandpa, being part of that family group. When we would talk to them, when we were renting units, we would see this. And so combining with other, signals that we're seeing in the marketplace, we said, hey, we got to do this ground floor bedroom bathroom that would serve the older, generations of that family, where they don't have to necessarily walk up and down the stairs. We don't have elevators in these units in part to keep them cost effective, but this is a way that, a person can live with their family, even be separated a little bit, right? Like, for their own privacy, they're downstairs. Right. And so this has turned out to be a really, a very primary part of our offer. We now only do 5-bedroom townhouse units with that ground floor bedroom bathroom. We're not doing any units that don't have that.
So it's really interesting because it's quite contrary to US culture to have many generations living together, although I think that's being forced upon us now. Right. With boomerang kids, right?
Mm-hmm. So the way we look at it is this, and you make an excellent point. If you look at, traditional sort of, American, 50s era nuclear family, mom and dad and, 2.3 kids and, a garage and, 2 cars in the garage, that kind of thing. If you look even further back in history in both American culture, but let's just say European culture, really anywhere around the world, the lifestyle of the 50s era nuclear family in America was an anomaly. And it was an anomaly because if you look back historically, I did research and, we looked up what was the makeup of a household in the medieval era in England, as an example. And it was interesting because the way they described it is they said the household in that era was multi-generational already. Like that existed just inherently. And that was a function of multiple reasons, but the 2 primary reasons, and really the main reason, was economics, right? So the idea of maybe 1 or 2 wage earners affording a house by themselves was really, it didn't exist. And so what that caused people to do is they would have other parts of their family who were also bringing income to the family group to afford this house, or even that described in older eras, taking on boarders, right? Like just, almost complete strangers. And so the idea of this nuclear family house is really, if you look at historically, it's a blip on the timeline. Yeah. And then if you go forward now, I have a graph, which I'm happy to share with you, but we're now in a multi-generational growth cycle in the American housing markets where, one example is the boomerang kids. But I think that for economic reasons, people are starting to live multi-generationally, and we're at the highest point of that amount of families that are living multi-generationally. At least the stat that I have shows that 64% of households in the United States live multi-generationally, and it's an upward trend on the graph. It's at its highest point, and I think that again is an economic function.
Yeah, I grew up in a multi-generational family, and I think it was way more than economics. Because there was always an adult around for kids, and it just made life so much easier.
Agreed.
So it was
so let me add something. The way we think of these tenets, the family profiles, we really think of them in 3 ways, and you've triggered me to think about this. So the first way that these families live is that they share incomes and they share costs among the larger family group, right? That's the economic part of it that I described. 2 is that because of the incomes that they're at, either low, very low or moderate incomes, that they tend to have a limited number of cars, right? And, cars are a thing in California, and designing buildings to house cars, like it's a pretty sensitive subject in some parts of, people who are in the business. But the reality is, functionally, this is, what's needed, but we don't see like a high car ownership, like your classic suburban house would have, a family of 4 or 5, and they'd have like 10 cars. I'm being ridiculous. Right. And we get this come up as we present this model to cities, the reaction is, oh my gosh, you're going to have so many cars, but, functionally, again, economics, they don't own so many cars. And then the third component,
better for the environment and better for cities, and
absolutely,
better on so many levels, right?
Agreed. And then the third component is just to wrap up is, and this is what you alluded to, is because we're multi-generational and because we are multi-wage earners, the way we look at it and the way we've seen it actually work is that generally an adult will be at home at all times during the day. And so that means when kids get home from school, somebody will be there for them. And there's no economics around that. And you could maybe say it's a cultural thing, but to me, this is when we think about social ethics and social impact. And social ethics, I mean, but how do we as a developer and how do I as the CEO want to present our model to the marketplace? And although, investors go, maybe that's important, maybe that's not. For me, I go, this is a really important thing that, avoids, latchkey kid syndrome. It keeps the family tighter. And this is, even your experience living, multi-generationally is that you're going to always have, an adult. It might be grandma. It might be, Uncle Joe who works the night shift. But it's, it's a real key component of this model that we very much are encouraged by and even want to, do more of.
I really like it. So in a way, it reminds me of the trendier version of this, which we call co-housing, right?
Mm-hmm. Co-living, right?
Co-living,
Agreed.
co-housing, which is popping up to serve, I think, probably more millennials who want to share costs and amenities, so for a different reason. But it's all part of this sharing economy, isn't it?
It is. In fact, we think of this in really 3 ways. In fact, we have a relationship with the folks at Kaufman, which is, one of the, primary sort of, co-living offers that we've seen in the marketplace. And I actually sat on a panel at a conference with Shayna Lee, who was one of their acquisitions folks in California at the time. And it was interesting. I hadn't seen her presentation in full until I sat on the stage with her. And it was amazing to me because as she started to describe their product, she goes, we build 5-bedroom units or 6-bedroom units. And she and I connected after the panel and we said, we should really meet because clearly what we're doing and what you guys are doing has a lot of alignment, but for different marketplaces, right?
Yeah.
And so as you described, this is millennial, this is, sharing economy, very high-end finishes, they want to locate in trendier neighborhoods. Our model, UTH...
And they want yoga.
Yeah, they want yoga and they want rooftop decks and,
That's right.
really high-end kitchen finishes. I mean, the product is beautiful, no doubt. Yeah. But what this did in this conversation, Eve, is it really opened my eyes that basically our model, UTH, is a co-living model.
Yes.
We just happen to be oriented around single family groups or family groups, generally. But the economics benefit of the sharing are the same. In other words, if you say I've got, and maybe in a co-living for millennials, everybody's an income generator for each bedroom. And so a 5-bedroom unit would have 5 income earners. Our model is the same, except maybe we have 2 to 4 wage earners, but again, it's sharing cost and sharing, well, you're not really income on the co-living millennial side, but, certain these families are in our model doing that.
Responsibilities and sharing products. I mean, there may not be, there's car sharing as well. So,
yeah, true.
I mean, the fact that that we were building for 10 vehicles in the suburbs was kind of crazy. How much could you possibly drive one vehicle?
Right. Agreed.
So,
And in fact, just an interesting note, as I was having a conversation with one of our project managers, he's managing one of our projects in Montebello up in San Gabriel Valley. He and I were having this conversation about families who would come to look at the units would start to have a conversation as he was, talking with them and touring them. They really broke it down into what is the cost per bedroom. They were, of course, looking at the whole dollar rent, right? And for our 5-bedroom units, we're average between $3,000 and $3,500. But the families were going, how much per bedroom? Is it, 500, 600, 700 per bedroom?
Yeah.
And for them, they were like, that's actually affordable. Now, we know that, in the marketplace on a whole dollar rent basis, $3,500 a month is not affordable in that context of how people think of it generically. But when you overlay that rent amount, given the total income that's produced in a family group with 4 wage earners, then it actually does drop truly into the 80 to 120% of median area income. And so our product is a naturally occurring moderate income housing offer, truly. Now, we don't put a covenant on it. And so people, when they look at it, like when I have conversations with affordable housing, pure affordable housing people, they go, oh, that's not really that, because that's, it's not restricted and it doesn't have a 55-year covenant. And I go, true. And we do have projects that have, certain number of units restricted in them. But what I go is, if you put a covenant on it, then it will change the dynamic of the investment model for raising capital. And then we go back to now this true affordable housing model, where I always say that total subsidy to develop a true affordable housing is always going to be finite. There will never be enough subsidy to subsidize enough projects to serve all the very low and low income families across the US. There's not enough capital in the marketplace to do that. There never will be. And so I say it's finite. And so our model then, yes, we don't have a covenant. Yes, there is some potential for rents to rise, but we are serving a family group, at least in the early stages of it, that didn't have that offer. They couldn't go rent a 5-bedroom unit for $3,500. They would, their next choice was to rent a 5-bedroom house for $4,000, $5,000, depending on the market.
No, it's great. So how many of these units have you built?
So the early stages of the cycle in 2017, 2018, we were very careful to keep the project sizes low and the number of projects low in what we call our demonstration phase. So we were literally doing, 3, 4, 5, 7 unit projects. And we did that purposely because I had 3 things that I wanted to prove in the demonstration phase. One is that we could rent the units for what we projected, that we truly were going to deliver the rents at the amounts that we thought we should get. 2 is that we could build them at the cost that we projected. Rising construction costs, everybody's dealing with that, and it's particularly distinct in California. And 3rd, and most importantly for us as a non, affordable housing, or at least developing projects that don't have, subsidy and covenants, we have to have a certain value when we get to the end of the project, that it delivers the value or valuation that we intend. And so we've actually closed and completed the demonstration phase. We've been able to deliver on average about 26% internal rate of return to our equity investors.
That's pretty fabulous.
We've sold those projects, and now we're moving into a new phase, which I'm calling our production phase. And we're probably about a year into that. And what that has us do is go up in volume, but particularly go up in project size. So as an example, we recently won an RFP in a city called El Monte in Southern California. And that's a little over a 5-acre site. And we'll end up doing, somewhere around 53 of these UTH units in a single project. And so the total unit count is probably no more than about 70 units right now, all told, between what's in the pipeline and what we've built and sold. But I consciously wanted to go in a very disciplined.
You'd not apologize for it. You're innovating something brand new, and 70 units is pretty pretty fabulous
Well, I
considering.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the reasons why I was attracted to, you and I know each other and we've had many conversations. But part of my obligation is I need to get the news about this innovation out into the marketplace. I mean, one, to raise more capital, but also I think this is a solution amongst many that are needed in this new environment of, just highly constrained, development pipelines and, low production of housing. We're going to need many answers. And this is, one of them.
This is just one of them. Yeah. So tell me, how did banks receive this when you went to finance the earliest projects?
Sure. So we actually used a couple.
That's a loaded question, right?
Yeah, of course. No, and it's a valid question. It's one we considered. And so we went out and talked to about 10 different banks. And we got a variety of answers, as you would well imagine, right? Everybody looked at it differently, but it sort of fell into two categories of reactions. One, to be honest with you, on the commercial banking side, without having a demonstrated pipeline of successful projects and the product being so, innovative and different and uncommon, we got a lot of, they were nice, but they were like, yeah, we don't think this is for us. This is so unusual. We don't know the valuation model. We don't know who buys this. And we were like prepared for that. I went into those meetings knowing that that was probably what we were going to hear. And so the other group of lenders that we talked to were a variety of, we have some private lenders that we have, longstanding relationships with. And then we have a small group of, I'll call community lending groups or institutions. So one of the folks that we've had conversations with is Century Housing, which is a local nonprofit in Southern California. And they have something called the Century Community Lending Fund. And that's run by a woman named Tracy Burns, who's a long-time colleague of mine from the Kaufman and Broad days. We haven't done a project with them yet, but it very much fits inside what they are after. So their fund is a conglomeration of monies from, B of A, Wells, and US Bank. And their business plan, their mandate is to lend to projects that have unusual characteristics. Maybe they're true affordable, but maybe they're just infill in communities that need it. And certainly UTH fits in that well.
But this is my beef. Like, you're innovating and you're doing it very carefully, and you're showing that it's successful. And it's very difficult to find funding for that, or traditional financing for that innovation. And yet, we all know how much this sort of housing or any sort of affordable housing is needed. Why on earth should it be so difficult? It's easier for the podium projects to get financing.
Amazingly so. Right?
And yet we don't really need them anymore. In fact, quite the reverse. We need them to stop because they've flooded the market.
Agreed.
I don't get it. Having to change this. Like, can we really wait like 5 to 10 years while a bank or banks or traditional financial institutions become comfortable enough with a new model?
The joke that I would say to the commercial banking guys and folks that we knew, and these were usually people that I already knew and had relationships with, I said, hey, look, by the time the model proves itself the way you guys want, the cycle will be over. Will be saturated. And that's maybe why the podium projects are the way you describe. It's, lemmings into the sea. Everybody's going to follow what everybody else is doing. I think for me, Eva, I've made peace with that process of, frustrating bankers or having them frustrate me or the projects, because like this project and product type is so different that almost at every turn, city, conversations with council members and planning staff, I know I'm either going to get, wow, this is great, I love this, or wow, holy cow, I don't even know how to deal with this. In fact, I'm sort of freaked out by the number of bedrooms and, imagining the worst case scenarios. Equity investors have been very polarized. They either get it and they're like, wow, this is, but like people who know, like particularly where I find is people that are from already existing housing constrained marketplaces, let's say investors from New York or from Southern California for the Bay Area, they already know this housing constraint story. And
Yes.
so when this shows up, they go, oh, I get it, right? Like not even a thought about it. I don't even have to really, describe it to them much more. But people who are from maybe more like non-constrained markets, let's say somebody's from Texas, and I don't have a specific example of anybody who's done this, but when you can build housing really unfettered from a zoning or capital constraint standpoint, well, then you don't have that issue of, constrained housing and rising costs. But I can say any coastal urban market pretty much has this issue. And so, in fact,
we have this issue in the Rust Belt cities for different reasons, but I am extremely frustrated by it. And that's why I built Small Change. It was really because I had this feeling that innovative projects are really being squashed by our financial institutions. Yeah. And yet innovation is the only way we're going to solve these problems and build better cities and house everyone and all of the other things we need to do. It's
agreed. And Eve, this is what I love about, and although I'm looking for the right deal to do with you guys, I will tell you, as we have conversations with other groups that are in the same space that you are, everybody is so focused on just whatever is the, path of least resistance. So many groups that I'm talking to now are all about value add apartment acquisition. And even just the development model is, anathema to them. And again, I understand that, but, they're so not creative. And I think part of what happens is, particularly in the crowdfunding space, I think you get a lot of people who are tech people going into real estate. And I think my opinion, my assessment of it is they are scared of it. Right. Yes. Whereas you, in fact, I was thinking about this morning as getting ready to do this interview, you've developed your own projects, Eve, right? You've gone through the process of doing that. And I would say 99 out of 100 people that I talk to in the crowdfunding space, usually they're, very early in their careers. And so they haven't gone through any seasoning. And so, and real estate's just a product that happens to be, combined with tech in this standpoint. But they're not seasoned in the way that, folks like you and I are. And I mean that in the best way. It's just, real estate development is a very, very tricky business. And it takes a lot of strategic knowledge to be able to do it competently. And that doesn't happen at, when, you're in early phases of your career.
It takes a long time to see the results too, of your hypothesis, right? Whatever you take on, it takes a while before you can actually see the results. So.
Correct. And that's in fact why we did the demonstration phase, because, I've certainly been guilty as any other developer of finding what I thought was a great idea and just, launching as big as you could. And, I've had some successes in that, manner or methodology, and I've had some failures. And so from that, I just said, hey, look, let's do this very rigorous and disciplined. Let's prove the model. Because we could have done the early projects, Eve, and they would have, failed or at least not failed, because any housing you build new in California is pretty much going to be, have, good value. But my criteria was, does it serve the families that we intended in the way we intended and the way they need? And does it produce, sufficient yield to investors for me to compete in the capital raising process? Right. Those were the two criteria. And if either one of those failed, then we were done and, go on to do something else.
So I think you described why we called ourselves Small Change. Small change leads to big change, right?
Right. Agreed. And I'm very encouraged, if anything, in new, trends, and now that, not that crowdfunding is a new trend, but, we haven't seen the broad base of different types of offers and different ways of looking at it. I mean, your combination of, social impact and crowdfunding is, to me, just amazing. And, I'm, rooting for you guys to grow, to not be, to be bigger than. Well,
we're going to talk about that because you might help us. So.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I think this is really interesting stuff. So you have some investors who took the plunge with you.
Right.
So they're interested in impact, really. And I'm wondering what you think the future of real estate impact investing looks like.
So, that's an excellent question, and I might just answer it in a different way than you had conveyed the question. And this, our early investors they recognize the social impact, but I don't think they were driven by it primarily. Of course, any investor that's not, purely social impact coming from a source of capital that doesn't need to produce returns. They need to produce returns. They're looking for me to do that, and that's primary. So I would say they are predominantly oriented around, making a profit and, receiving yield back and getting their money back in the first place. And I have had many conversations with, we in the beginning of UTH thought, social impact funds, social impact organizations, this is just right in the right space for them, meaning UTH, naturally occurring moderate income. I personally have found it a little bit of a challenge to get on people's radars for a couple reasons. And this is no complaint. This is just me being, my blunt, honest self. One is that, rightly so, most social impact organizations, housing is, low on the priority list. And I don't I go get it, right? If you're oriented to making, the highest impact with the dollars that you have available to do that, housing may or may not be, functionally, appropriate for that. But I also, what I found was that when I started to talk about moderate income housing, we didn't fit the model of what people were looking for in the social impact space relative to housing. And what I mean by that is that they said, look, if we're going to invest our dollars in projects, we want to invest it in neighborhoods and the demographic profile, the renter profile at 20, 30, 40, certainly below 60% of median income, because that's where the need is highest. And that's where the housing constraint and strain on families is the highest. And I completely acknowledge that. Like, my background in affordable housing has me understand that intuitively. And so social impact capital coming into that space will have an impact. And in fact, will arguably, I said earlier, subsidy is finite, right? I was meaning government subsidy, but you could argue social impact capital, appropriately invested, could raise that level of finiteness. But I would also say still, we're without just a natural market mechanism, I think that we're going to always have some constraint. So again, no complaint, just an observation.
Yeah.
I saw social impact, at least the groups that I talked to said, well, they got it. Like they said, we get this. And we see the value and the social, impact value for it. But we're focused in this, 60% or below space. I had a great conversation with the person who runs the enterprise group in Southern California. And I think it was just like she got it, but I think it was just not where their focus was. They were focused on true affordable housing. And, when that started to become a theme or a regular reaction, we continue to track social impact investors. And I think there will be a time when that's appropriate, or at least somebody has the investment mandate or the criteria where, middle income families will be, part of what they need to point their dollars at. But I think there's almost a little bit of a competitive, feeling like, well, if I invest $1 in your project that's serving working families, that takes $1 away from the homeless project that I need to support. And I don't dispute the idea. To me, it was almost too, the story is a broader story of that, right?
Yeah, no,
housing constraint and the pressure on families across the income spectrum is happening at all levels. And so that then to me says then solutions need to be at all parts of the spectrum.
Right.
Happen to be in, this, particular modern income part of the spectrum.
Well, this has really been fascinating. I have 3 sign-off questions that I'd like to ask you, if that's
sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What's the key factor for you that makes a real estate project impactful?
So where I go to is neighborhoods and demographics relative to the locations of those neighborhoods. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So in essence, our UTH model, really, we seek out lower and lower middle income neighborhoods that traditionally don't see much development, right? Because the economic conditions of those neighborhoods don't suggest to the development marketplace that this is a place to build. Maybe affordable housing, but nothing other than that. So as an example, in Fullerton, we're developing a project in West Fullerton that hasn't seen any new housing developed in that neighborhood, let's say in a few blocks radius from our site, in probably 40 or 50 years. Which is amazing to me. Like we're in the, probably the most constrained marketplace in the United States, and this neighborhood is untouched, right? And there's different reasons for that, zoning, economics, and that kind of thing. So I'm encouraged to be able to go into a neighborhood and say, we can create this new housing opportunity for families that, by the way, already live there. The families that rent in our units are already in this neighborhood, or, they're a couple neighborhoods over. But they're already living in this neighborhood, except that they may be living in two bedrooms side by side, or one part of the family lives in this unit and the other part of the family lives a couple blocks over.
Right.
We're just giving them a space to come together, right?
Right.
But the other part of it that I see as impactful is that naturally, because of the neighborhoods that we select and because of where the folks who rent our units already live, this naturally has them be closer to the important things in their lives. And in fact, I describe this tenant profile as sticky. And what I mean by that is that they have things that exist for them already where they live and where our new units are located, that have them be very stable and families that basically stay. And that's social networks is the main way I describe that. So that's churches, community, community work, or, involvement in the community that they have. That's schools, their kids go to school. But most importantly is that these units, because of their infill locations, are generally closer to the jobs these folks work at, which are, as you would imagine, are more blue collar or service worker jobs, where none of our families who we've rented to or in our units now, none of them commute, do this hour or 2 hour commute each way. They just don't do it. What they do is they look for the unit that is close by to their work, and they don't do it in a way that we think where, a millennial person might say, look, I really want to live close to my job because I want to ride my bike, or I want to ride the train. These families make the same decision, but for different logic. One is, I don't want to drive my car, that much, because maybe it's, not a great car. It still runs good, gets me to work, but I can't drive 2 hours back and forth. And plus, I think just naturally, they understand the trade-off of that. And so because the way they share rents and incomes, it gives them the capacity to stay in infill locations, right? So by sharing more cost amongst the bigger group, that allows them now to stay, in one of our downtown Long Beach projects, we have actually two, we say that, just generally our tenant profile is, the dad, is a truck driver at the Port of Los Angeles or Port of Long Beach, right? That's where his job is. He goes there. And then our, two new communities that are in downtown Long Beach are, between, 10 and 15 minutes away from that job on surface streets. Doesn't get on the freeway, drives his job. That job probably produces, $50,000 or $60,000 a year, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the person. And then when that's combined with the other incomes for the families, now they can afford that, $3,000 or $3,500 a month rent at 30% of their income, because jointly they're making 100, 110, 120,000 a year.
Okay, so the next question I have is that, you can raise money through equity crowdfunding. Is there another reason to use it, to involve investors through crowdfunding that you can think of?
Well, there is, and it's a great question. I haven't thought of it this way, but I think as any developer, our job is to raise capital, right? Like if I look at my primary responsibility, I say I have to always be raising capital. And so I see crowdfunding in a couple different ways that way. One, it's a new technology, or it's a new process of raising capital, right? And I'm always just naturally is how I am as a learner and a person of business. I'm always looking for the more effective, more technologically, efficient way to manage our business. And so I see crowdfunding as it gives us the capability to have a wider audience for our product offer, right? For a project goes out, and now we can see where, I have my network of investors, and I'm always expanding that network, and I am building networks of networks, right, to produce new capital opportunities, new investors. But crowdfunding is like that on steroids, right? So we have technological platforms. Obviously, crowdfunding groups like yours have their own investor base. And so I'm able to broaden the reach of our offer. And also, right, yours is a separate new network. And so that is a capability to access that.
And then this is a big question, but if you could do one thing to improve real estate development in the US, what would that be?
Yeah. So easy question. I would. So there's a lot of dialogue on the social media platforms about zoning reform. And so if you look at your standard American city, almost any major urban metro, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, many cities converted what was historically neighborhoods or zoning areas that allowed apartments or more dense housing, and they downzoned almost consistently across major urban metros in the United States. And so we are, seeing the very cutting edge of that right now. So Oregon is working on, removing single family zoning entirely. I think I want to say it was Minnesota or Wisconsin. I can't remember which. They are starting to say, look, we are eliminating single family zoning. That as a zoning tool, or at least that type of zoning,
it's interesting,
is very ineffective in solving housing constraint. In fact, it's the reason for housing constraint in my mind, the primary reason. But also, if we're going to meet our environmental, greenhouse gas emissions standards, we cannot continue to build, nor can we allow single family neighborhoods to exist as they are, because basically, when we build dense housing, it's, proven by research that type of lifestyle reduces vehicle trips, has people use more transportation that's alternate to cars. In fact, in California, there's a new, I don't know, as a report or an article that basically said California will not meet its greenhouse emissions gas levels by just, having cars be, better, at producing less, smog. And their claim, and I believe it, and I think it was based on, real research, said the only way we're going to get there is that we need to reform zoning and we need to basically build more dense.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much. This was really fascinating. I feel like I learned a lot. And
thank you.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about it off the air, but I really appreciate the time you've taken with me today. It was a really interesting conversation.
Thanks, Eve. Appreciate the invite, and I enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed talking to Scott today, and I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Scott reminded us all that subsidy is finite, so building market rate solutions for the housing crisis is an imperative. He noted that the 50s era household in the US, a suburban home with mom, dad, 2.3 kids and 5 cars, was an anomaly. We need to get over it. And I love that he has shown that a much needed and affordable housing model can be financed through private equity. To find out more about impact real estate investing and to get access to the show notes for today's episode, please go to evepicker.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while doing good for society at the same time. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today, and thank you, Scott, for sharing your thoughts. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.